Grace and peace. I'm Brian Musser, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Christian Fellowship, the peace of Jesus Christ to change our lives, the power of the Holy Spirit to change our world. And we are concluding our study on the book of Titus today. We've gone over 8 lessons so far. This is the 9th one, and it is just kind of like the first one was introduction to Titus. This one is kind of the conclusion to Titus. We're looking at the last couple verses, and we're also looking at how Titus is similar to other conclusions that Paul has in his other letters as well. So, and then we'll, at the end of this lesson, do kind of an overview summary of the things we've learned along the way with the book of Titus. So, looking at the last 3 verses in Titus, as soon as I send Artemis and Tychicus to you, do your best to come to me at Nicopolis, because I have decided to winter there. Do everything you can to help Zenas the lawyer and Apollos on their way, and see that they have everything they need. Our people must learn to devote themselves to doing what is good in order to provide for urgent needs and not live unproductive lives. Everyone with me sends you greetings. Greet those who love us in the faith. Grace be with you all. So that's kind of the last 4 verses of Titus, and it is a typical ending as Paul has. There's certain things to break down. He moves people around a little bit. He says to support some folks. He gives one last kind of charge sort of thing, but it's tied to the supporting folks. He greets people. He sends greetings and greets people, and then he gives them an ending blessing. Those are kind of the 4 pieces to that, and they are kind of typical pieces through things. So moving people around. Interesting. As soon as I send Artemis and Tychicus to you, do your best to come to me at Nicopolis, because I have decided to winter there. Interestingly enough, like and we talked a lot about whether or not this was truly a Pauline letter or just written kind of in the spirit of Paul. We came to the conclusion that it makes most sense for Paul to have written this. And one of it is this kind of come to me at Nicopolis because I have decided to winter there. Nicopolis is a random town. There's no other kind of reference to Nicopolis. We never know of Paul being in Nicopolis. It would be weird for a fake author trying to pretend to be Paul to mention a town that no one knows Paul ever was at, and telling Titus to come meet Paul at a place there was no historical record of Paul being. Nicopolis is kind of a very random town for it to be included in as a point of reference in a letter that was made up. This makes it seem like Paul said this, was going to Nicopolis, all this kind of stuff, and wanted Titus. Like, that piece of information only makes sense in this letter if it's true. There's no other reason to include it except for the fact that it is true. Also, like Artemis, don't know. Tychicus, we have other mention of him, but it's interesting to include someone like Artemis, who we have no reference of in a made-up letter. The only reason for Artemis to be there is if Artemis was actually someone Paul was planning on sending to Crete to engage with Titus there. But Tychicus shows up a couple times, and it's kind of interesting. Let's look at these passages about Tychicus and then think about who Tychicus is. Ephesians 6:21 and 22, Tychicus, the dear brother and faithful servant of the Lord, will tell you everything so that you also may know how I am and what I am doing. I am sending him to you for this very purpose, that you may know how we are and that he may encourage you. So in this one, it seems like Paul, where he's writing the letter to the Ephesians, Tychicus is with him, and Paul sends Tychicus to the Ephesians, probably, more than likely, almost 99% certain the way this is written, that the letter to the Ephesians actually was in Tychicus's back pocket, and Paul sent Tychicus to Ephesus to deliver the letter, and any questions that the Ephesians may have had about the letter, Tychicus was prepared to answer them. So Paul sent Tychicus from where he was to Ephesus to deliver this letter and to make comments and talk about it with the Ephesians moving forward. So that lines up with what we see in Titus, that Paul is going to send Tychicus to Crete, wherever they are at as well. So we already see Paul sending Tychicus to Ephesus, planning to send Tychicus to Crete. And then we have Colossians 4:7-9. Tychicus will tell you all the news about me. He is a dear brother, a faithful minister, and a fellow servant of the Lord. I am sending him to you for the express purpose that you may know about our circumstances and that he may encourage your heart. He is coming with Onesimus, our faithful and dear brother, who is one of you. They will tell you everything that is happening here. And then 1 Timothy 4:12, I sent Tychicus to Ephesus. So that's probably already referencing the Ephesian letter. So that's probably the same thing. But we see in Colossians almost the same thing as in Ephesus. It seems like Tychicus and Onesimus are given the letter to the Colossians to deliver it and then explain it and give more details to this. So we see Paul sending Tychicus at least 3 different places. And then Acts 21 through 1, this is actually Luke writing about the ministry. When the uproar had ended, Paul sent for the disciples and after encouraged them, said goodbye and set out for Macedonia. He traveled through that area, speaking many words of encouragement to the people, and finally arrived in Greece, where he stayed 3 months because some Jews had plotted against him just as he was about to sail for Syria. He decided to go back through Macedonia. He was accompanied by Sopater, son of Pyrrhus from Berea, Aristarchus and Secundus from Thessalonica, Gaius from Derbe, Timothy also, and Tychicus and Trophimus from the province of Asia. These men went on ahead and waited for us in Troas. But we sailed from Philippi after the festival of unleavened bread, and 5 days later joined the others at Troas, where we stayed 7 days. So again, we see Tychicus traveling with Paul and a bunch of other people, being sent ahead kind of and waiting for him, Paul sailing around places. We see Tychicus being a part of Paul's missionary journey as recorded in Acts. And it seems like this guy was sent by Paul. Every time we hear mention of his name, it's because Paul's either planning to send him somewhere or has sent him somewhere to deliver a letter or to prepare for Paul's arrival, all this kind of stuff. It seems like this is one of those guys that was always kind of sent places, which is fascinating, I think. So what type of life does Tychicus have based on these passages? What can we think about when we think about Tychicus' life? He was probably it seems like every time we hear about him, he was moving someplace. He's moving around a lot. Crete, Ephesus, Colossae, Troas. There's all these different places where Paul sends Tychicus. So he seems to have a rather, nomadic is not the right word, transitory life. He's moving around for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of the ministry, in accordance to Paul's planning and kind of connections and directions. But every time he's mentioned, he's going somewhere, which is fascinating. So it seems like he's one of Paul's core team members as Paul is planting churches and ministering throughout the Mediterranean area. Tychicus is a vital part of that ministry and is willing to just get up and go based on Paul's directions. Is there something we can learn about missions through the fact that Tychicus was sent every time? at no point do we ever hear anything about what Tychicus wanted to do, what he decided to do. Like, he is always sent. His mission and ministry opportunities are always at the direction of Paul, of someone else. So he goes to all these different places. It seems like he goes because it has been decided he should go. It isn't there's very little sense that we get that Tychicus sat around and it's like, you know what? I'd like to visit Troas, or I'd like to see Colossae, or I want to go to Ephesus, or Crete's been on my to-do list. He's always sent. Paul sends him, and it's interestingly enough that even Paul and Barnabas in their first kind of mission were sent. There is something about doing missions because the church wants you to go someplace for the sake of the gospel. There are ideas where Macedonia laid out a call to Paul in a dream, so we can be called to places, but we're also sent those places by the church. There's a sentness to Tychicus's life and to kind of the mission of the church. It all kind of also points back to the fact that Christ was sent to earth by God. So there is this sentness in missions. And just kind of like a rhetorical question, have you ever considered relocating for the ministry or for the mission of God, for the sake of the gospel? Is that something that if the church sent you someplace, how would you feel about that? If the gospel needed you to go someplace, how would you feel about that? Yeah. Okay, so interestingly enough, Artemis, we have no other references to him, but Tychicus shows up quite a few points, and it's fascinating that there's one person that we know about and one person that we don't in this passage. So looking at these two verses, do everything you can help Zenas the lawyer, to help Zenas the lawyer and Apollos on their way, see that they have everything they need. Our people must learn to devote themselves to doing what is good in order to provide for the urgent needs and not live unproductive lives. So again, we see somebody who, Apollos is a well-known figure in the New Testament, shows up multiple times. Zenas, not so much. Both of them seem to be in Crete or coming quickly to Crete, and Titus is charged with mobilizing the church of Crete to help provide ministry support for Zenas and Apollos, whatever they need to be sent someplace else. They are on their way somewhere else. Don't know, never really have a reference to that, but the Cretan church is tasked by Paul to help provide for them primarily financially so that they can go. And not only do they need to provide for these two folks, but Paul is kind of using these two folks as a way to get the Cretans used to providing for folks to go and to be sent. So this idea, these two folks are going to be used by Paul to plan their, like to change, not to change, but to develop the culture in the Cretan church to be a sending church, that they are going to gather resources in order to send folks on the mission of God. And we see this, and this is also Paul's commending these two guys to them, Zenas and Apollos. So it's like, they're coming with my blessing. I'm mentioning in this letter, when they show up, when they're there, treat them as if I have commended them. And we see Paul doing this a lot. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church in Cenchreae, And I ask you to receive her and the Lord in a way worthy of his people, and give her any help she may need from you, for she has been the benefactor of many people, including me. 1 Corinthians 16, when Timothy comes, see to it that he has nothing to fear while he is with you, for he is carrying on the work of the Lord just as I am. No one then should treat him with contempt. Send him on his way in peace, so that he may return to me. I am expecting him along with the brothers. So there's this, Paul vouches for people in his letters, but also vouches for them in a way that makes the church understand that they're supposed to take care of these people, kind of as if they were taking care of Paul. They're part of the ministry, and he expects them to support them as part of the ministry. Now, why is it necessary for Paul to commend these individuals to the churches? I think this goes back to some of the what we see in the letter in the beginning of the Titus. The God sends Christ, who engages Paul, who encourages Titus, who leads the elders. He's putting these other folks on the same level as Titus. The commendation he gives to Titus is kind of on the same level as Apollos and Zenas. He is vouching for them because the chain needs to be explicitly there. He's showing that this chain of the gospel from God through Christ to Paul and the other apostles is now being passed on to these other guys. So there is this tradition in the church that people get commended by the apostles, by Paul, by those who received the word from Christ, in a way saying, no, I'm vouching for these guys. These guys are good. Take care of them. And it established them in a way and protects them from other people being able to abuse that. Paul is asking for support to help them, financial support especially, and taking care of them to help them go on the mission of God. Now, we see 15b, the letter ends, greet those who love us in faith. In Romans 6:13 through 16, at the end of Romans, Paul greets 28 individuals in a city that he has never been before. Paul was never to Rome before writing the letter of Romans, in that he greets people like he does in the end of Titus. He greets people at the end of Rome, and he greets 28 people who are living in Rome, in a city Paul's never been to. So Paul must have, by name, Paul must have met these people someplace other than Rome. And now he knows that they are in Rome, and he greets them in Rome by name. Fascinating. What do we learn about the early church when Paul knows so many Christians in Rome? Now, let's say Paul's writing, in the 50s and 60s. The church is still kind of small. I mean, we're talking thousands, not even tens of thousands. We're still talking thousands. We're not, 100,000 might be by 150, maybe one. Like, we're talking thousands of people, not not huge numbers. And we're talking an empire of 60 million people. But it seems, one, they all know each other. The churches are well connected. And two, the people move around a lot. There is this connection. There is this network of the churches. The churches seem and feel as if they're one big family. And when you move from one place to the other, especially if you're coming from the church, especially if your previous church vouches for you, especially if you get this commendation from Paul, there's greetings and things like that. It's like connected and actually taking care of one another as they move throughout the empire on the mission of God for the kingdom of God. They are also engaged with each other throughout multiple places, and they are seemingly a well-connected network of individuals who know each other, even though they might be separated by thousands of miles in an empire where travel by foot and sail is still the primary means of moving from one place to the other, and communication is done by letters. So we're seeing a very mobile population, small, well-connected population with these networks set up in these urban areas, all in communication with each other. And these letters and these people going from one place to another is establishing this network. Now, it's based, I believe, it's based on the backbone of the Jewish synagogues and Jewish diaspora that's already established in these cities, and it's able to move around because of the nature of the Roman Republic and well, the Roman Empire and those things. So it is taking advantage of some things that previously existed, but there's this well-connected network. Paul knows 28 people in a city he's never been to, by name, and well enough to greet them. So as we're looking at Titus, these are some of the ideas we got. Paul has sent Titus to the churches in Crete to appoint elders to teach the congregation sound doctrine. This sound doctrine has come from God through Christ to Paul. Paul has passed it on to Titus. This sound doctrine transforms lives into Christ likeness. It has transformed the lives of the elders and teachers. It will transform the lives of those who incorporate its truth into their lives. Sound doctrine revolves around the gospel, and transformed lives are great evidence of the truth of the gospel to this world. So as we look through Titus, we see it starts with this sound doctrine being passed from God through Christ to Paul, to Titus, to the elders, to the church, to the world. We see that chain of sound doctrine. We see that Titus is supposed to appoint elders to teach the sound doctrine to the congregation. We see that there are false teachers that are in direct contrast to the duly appointed elders who will be true teachers. We see this idea of teaching the sound doctrine to change lives, both the older men teaching the younger, older women teaching the younger, in a way not only that they know it, but that they live it. And we see the living it being a testimony to how the Holy Spirit and the Trinity of God has changed them. The gospel has changed them, has transformed them, in hopes that it will also transform the world around them. That's basically the letter of Titus as we look at it. I hope you've enjoyed going through this conversation with me. We've also did 3 special lessons talking about the role of women in ministry, talking about slavery and in the Bible, in Scripture, and also like the Roman Empire, and talking about last week we discussed the Trinity, opening up 3 large topics based on content in the book of Titus as well. Hopefully you enjoyed these 9 lessons and been able to follow along with us. This will be a playlist both on the website and on the YouTube channel, in a way that you can just kind of work through Titus with me together. If you have any comments, love to hear them down in the thing. I will enjoy having these conversations with you. I think the next series will be a series on just answering questions. We're going to get questions from the students and go through and answer them in kind of on a weekly basis. We haven't collected all the questions yet, so I don't want to say too much about what the questions will be, but there'll be questions that students want answered. So that's what will be the next series moving forward. As always, there are 2 ways to join you in person: Sunday nights at 5 p.m. in the JEMIC, and these weekly wrap-ups on YouTube and WordPress. I'm all over the social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, YouTube. Like, subscribe, and follow as appropriate on those media channels. I really enjoyed this conversation with you. Hopefully it will continue real soon.